They stood under the bright lights, begging venture capitalists for $50 million, proudly presenting my life's work as their own brilliant creation. They really believed a 40-page contract was enough to steal my algorithm and silence me forever. But when the chief executive officer smugly entered the access code mid-demo, he did not unlock a data revolution. He triggered my kill switch. I did not just crash their system. I burned their entire empire to ashes. Hello to all the wonderful listeners of Boss Revenge Stories, and thank you so much for your continuous support. Unfortunately, YouTube has completely demonetized our channel, leaving us without the budget to keep operating, which means we will not be uploading new videos here for the foreseeable future and will be moving our operations over to Patreon. If you enjoy today's story, please support us by joining our Patreon to hear even more incredible, exclusive true stories that are longer, feature highly detailed situations we cannot post on YouTube, and are brought to life by multiple emotional voice actors. You can join by simply scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the Patreon link in the description or pinned comment of this video. Now, let us begin today's story, which comes from a brilliant mind named Aurora Gray. Austin, Texas, was supposed to be the new promised land for tech visionaries, a place of endless sunshine, networking events, and innovation. But for me, at 31 years of age, the city was nothing more than a neon-lit cage. I worked as a senior software engineer specializing in spatial data compression at a startup called OmniStream. If you looked at our company website, you would see pictures of smiling millennials playing ping pong and drinking organic kombucha on tap. The company core values page prominently displayed the phrase, "We are not just a team, we are a family." But in corporate America, the word family is just a cleverly disguised trap. It is a psychological tool designed to make you feel guilty for leaving the office before the sun goes down. OmniStream was an absolute sweatshop. My daily routine consisted of 14 long hours staring at lines of code, desperately trying to optimize a legacy system that was fundamentally broken. My managers were the textbook definition of corporate bros. They wore expensive vests, used words like synergy and paradigm shift in every sentence, and contributed absolutely nothing of technical value. I knew the system better than anyone. I fixed their critical bugs, I salvaged their disastrous server migrations, and I kept the core product breathing. Yet, when the performance reviews rolled around, I was bypassed for a promotion 3 separate times. "Aurora, your technical skills are undeniable," my manager had told me during the latest review, leaning back in his ergonomic chair with an insufferable smirk. "But you just lack the leadership qualities we are looking for in a director. You are more of a behind-the-scenes worker bee. We need a visionary." A visionary. That word made my blood boil. They did not want vision. They wanted a loudmouth who could sell vaporware to gullible venture capitalists. That rejection was the catalyst. It was never about the money for me. It was about raw, undeniable proof of my capabilities. I needed to build something so profoundly advanced that it would make their so-called visionaries look like children playing with building blocks. So, after enduring 14 agonizing hours at the OmniStream office every single day, I would drag my exhausted body back to my cramped, poorly ventilated apartment on the outskirts of the city. I would lock the door, pull down the cheap plastic blinds, and begin my real work. I called it Aegis. Aegis was a quantum data compression algorithm I was building entirely from scratch. The concept was theoretically impossible according to industry standards, but I saw the math differently. I designed the architecture to fundamentally alter how spatial data was read and stored. When functioning correctly, Aegis could take a massive 8K resolution video file and compress it down to just a handful of megabytes without losing a single pixel of clarity. No latency, no visual degradation, just pure, unadulterated efficiency. The creation of Aegis took a heavy toll on my physical and mental health. My apartment became a dark, suffocating cave littered with towering pyramids of empty energy drink cans and half-eaten boxes of stale takeout. Night after night, I stayed awake until the early hours of the morning. I would fall asleep slumped over my mechanical keyboard, only to wake up an hour later with keycap imprints on my cheek, driven by a frantic obsession to perfect the code. The only illumination in my living room was the harsh, cold blue light radiating from my dual monitors. It washed over my increasingly pale face, highlighting the deep, dark circles under my eyes. But I did not care about my reflection. I only cared about the machine learning models within Aegis. I built the algorithm to be self-learning and self-optimizing. It was beautiful. It was flawless. It was a masterpiece born from isolation and spite. While I was weaving this digital miracle in the dark, the shiny veneer of OmniStream was rapidly cracking. The company was hemorrhaging cash. Our chief executive officer, Julian Vance, was a charismatic fraud who had burned through millions of dollars of seed funding on lavish marketing campaigns and influencer endorsements, while completely neglecting the actual engineering of our core product. Our proprietary software was obsolete, clunky, and crashing constantly. Clients were canceling their subscriptions by the dozens. The board of directors was demanding answers, and the financial runway was evaporating fast. The atmosphere in the office turned toxic almost overnight. The kombucha kegs ran dry, the ping-pong tables collected dust, and Julian Vance began pacing the open-plan office like a cornered animal. He called an emergency all-hands meeting, standing before us with a red face and frantic eyes. He dropped the fake family persona completely, glaring at the engineering team. "We need a miracle this quarter," Julian barked, slamming his fist onto the podium. "If we do not have a revolutionary breakthrough to show investors for the Series B funding round next month, we are dead. I will personally fire every single one of you before I let this company sink." I wanted a miracle. He had absolutely no idea that the very miracle he desperately needed was sitting quietly in the back row, exhausted, underpaid, and harboring a weapon that could change everything. The air inside the glass-walled conference room was thick with the stench of desperation and stale espresso. It was a Tuesday morning, and the executive team was practically hyperventilating over the latest churn metrics. The financial reports were disastrous. Marcus, our chief technology officer, a man whose entire technical vocabulary consisted of buzzwords he regurgitated from morning podcasts, was sweating profusely through his designer shirt. Julian paced the length of the room like a maniac, demanding impossible solutions from a completely demoralized engineering team. In a moment of profound, catastrophic naivety, I spoke up. I thought this was my grand opportunity. I foolishly believed that if I threw them a lifeline, they would finally see my true worth and give me the respect I had earned. I opened my laptop, projected my screen onto the wall, and showed them the raw performance data of my secret project. I explained how it could reduce server loads by an exponential margin, how it handled immense spatial data with absolute zero latency. I presented the masterpiece I had sacrificed my health to build. The transformation in the room was instantaneous and frankly nauseating. The panic in their eyes vanished, instantly replaced by the hungry, predatory gleam of scavengers smelling fresh meat. Julian stopped his frantic pacing. Marcus suddenly sat up straight, his eyes widening. The condescending tone they usually reserved for me completely evaporated. "Aurora, my God, this is absolute game-changing material," Julian said, his voice dripping with sudden, artificial warmth. "This is exactly the kind of out-of-the-box thinking we champion here at OmniStream. You are an absolute rock star. This is pure synergy." Marcus chimed in, clapping his hands together like an excited child. "Absolutely incredible work, Aurora. We need to get this into a sandbox environment immediately. Let us upload the core repository to our internal company servers so we can run some high-level stress tests, just for a routine internal evaluation. Of course, we are going to make sure you get a massive bonus for this breakthrough." I wanted that validation so badly that I believed their lies. I deployed the code. Exactly 48 hours after I integrated the algorithm into the OmniStream server architecture, I tried to pull a branch to fix a minor caching issue. A cold, gray error message popped up on my screen. "Access denied. My repository privileges had been permanently revoked." Before I could even ping the IT department to ask what was wrong, I received an automated calendar invite. It was a mandatory meeting in Julian's corner office. When I walked through the double doors, the atmosphere was freezing. Marcus was there, staring intently at his expensive leather shoes, refusing to make eye contact with me. Julian was sitting comfortably behind his massive oak desk, and next to him sat a stranger in a bespoke gray suit with a sleek briefcase, a corporate lawyer. Julian pushed a heavy, leather-bound folder across the desk toward me. The friendly corporate brother from 2 days ago was entirely gone. In his place sat a cold, calculating shark who had just secured his next meal. The lawyer opened the folder without saying a word. It was my employment contract, the exact document I had blindly signed 3 years ago when I first joined the company, eager and optimistic. It was a 40-page document filled with dense, suffocating legal jargon. The lawyer pointed a perfectly manicured finger at a highlighted paragraph buried deep within Section 7. As per this specific clause, the lawyer began, his voice completely devoid of human emotion, any intellectual property created by the employee on personal devices or during personal time that directly relates to the business direction or industry of OmniStream remains the sole and exclusive property of the company. Julian leaned forward, resting his elbows on the mahogany desk, lacing his fingers together. You see, Aurora, data compression is our primary business direction. Therefore, your little algorithm belongs to us. We are taking it over. They did not just steal my code. They actively erased my existence from the project entirely. Julian proudly announced that the algorithm was being completely rebranded as OmniCore. Worse yet, he appointed himself as the chief architect and visionary behind the project, claiming he had conceptualized the mathematics during a weekend retreat. They were already packing their bags for a massive demo in San Francisco, aiming to secure a staggering $50 million in Series B funding from top-tier venture capitalists, using my blood, sweat, and tears as their golden ticket. They expected me to cry. They fully expected me to scream, to throw my chair, to threaten them with useless lawsuits, or to storm out of the building in a tearful rage. The lawyer was practically bracing his body for a hysterical outburst. But as I looked at Julian's smug, self-satisfied face, something deep inside my chest went completely cold. The burning anger crystallized into absolute terrifying clarity. If I threw a fit, they would simply march me out of the building with security guards, and I would never be able to touch those server mainframes again. So, I did the most terrifying thing a victim could ever do. I kept my mouth shut, and I smiled. I understand, I said softly, my voice perfectly steady and devoid of any tremble. I apologize for the misunderstanding regarding the contract terms. It was incredibly unprofessional of me to assume otherwise. Julian blinked, his arrogant smile faltering for a fraction of a second, clearly thrown off balance by my absolute submission. However, I continued, keeping my eyes locked dead onto his, OmniCore is a highly complex architecture. The integration requires constant monitoring, especially before such a critical investor presentation. I would like to formally request permission to stay on the team and assist Marcus with the system maintenance for the upcoming demo. I just want to see our family succeed. Julian let out a short, arrogant laugh, his chest puffing out. He looked at the lawyer, then back at me, a victorious, sickening smirk spreading across his face. He truly thought he had completely broken my spirit. He thought he had domesticated a wild dog and turned it into an obedient, pathetic sheep. Of course, Aurora, Julian said, his tone dripping with thick condescension. We always appreciate your team spirit. I simply nodded, turned around, and walked calmly out of the executive office. They had absolutely no idea. They had just handed the keys to the kingdom directly back to their executioner. For the next 21 days, I played the role of the utterly defeated, subservient corporate drone. I became a ghost in the machine. I fetched lukewarm lattes for the management team without a single word of complaint. I sat quietly in the dimly lit corner of the main server room, pretending to take diligent notes while Marcus proudly explained the intricacies of my own architecture to newly hired junior developers. He used absurd technical buzzwords he fundamentally misunderstood, and I simply nodded enthusiastically, playing my part perfectly. Whenever Julian delivered his manic, aggressive motivational speeches about disrupting the tech industry and conquering the upcoming funding round, I clapped along with the rest of the exhausted staff. They needed a reliable workhorse to handle the grueling, mind-numbing system stability checks, and I gladly volunteered for every single midnight shift. I made sure they saw me struggling to keep my eyes open. I made sure they believed I was desperate to keep my job. By day 14 of this elaborate charade, their initial paranoia had completely vanished. I was no longer a disgruntled genius who might pose a security threat. I was just part of the office furniture, a docile worker bee whose spirit had been completely broken by their brilliant corporate maneuvering. They lowered their defenses to absolute zero. The night before the final system handover for the massive San Francisco showcase, the office was entirely empty. It was 11 o'clock at night, the only sound echoing through the cold. Open-plan workspace was the steady hum of the industrial air conditioning units and the rhythmic, precise tapping of my mechanical keyboard. I sat in the darkness, my face illuminated only by the glow of the terminal. I did not log in to delete their databases. Pure vandalism is the desperate tactic of amateurs. If I simply erased the repository or crashed the mainframe, they would easily restore everything from their off-site backups by the morning, and I would be sitting in a police interrogation room facing federal cybercrime charges. My retaliation required surgical precision and absolute deniability. I opened the core directory of the application and created a single, seemingly benign text file. I named it Cache Integrity Validation Point Executable. To anyone scanning the repository, even a seasoned third-party security auditor, it looked exactly like a standard, boring background process designed to clear temporary memory logs to prevent system lag. It was entirely invisible within the millions of lines of code. It was my lethal injection, waiting patiently in the dark. Inside that unassuming file, I programmed a digital guillotine. Most malicious scripts rely on a simple countdown timer or a remote execution command sent from an external server. I did not want to leave anything to chance, nor did I want to be anywhere near a computer when the execution occurred. Instead, I tied the activation trigger directly to the core application programming interface that handled high-level client authentication. I knew exactly how the presentation was structured. The demo was designed to be highly interactive to impress the venture capitalists. Julian planned to invite the lead investor on stage to manually input a secure 10-digit alphanumeric institutional fund code into the sandbox environment. This was supposed to demonstrate our real-time encryption and processing speed. The exact moment the system registered that specific length of string from an external, Tier 1 financial identifier, my dormant file would wake up. There was no timer. The greed of the investors was the trigger. But I did not just write a script to shut down the servers. A simple blue screen of death would just look like a typical startup technical glitch. They could easily spin that. Julian would charm his way out of it, blaming a bad internet connection or a faulty hardware node. I needed a spectacle of absolute, undeniable destruction. I needed to humiliate them. So, I weaponized the very nature of my creation. My software was built to compress unimaginably heavy spatial data into tiny packages. The hidden payload was designed to execute a localized decompression overload. During the presentation, the algorithm would be holding hundreds of terabytes of preloaded, highly compressed dummy video files. When triggered, my malicious code would force the central processing units to instantly reverse the compression process on every single byte of that data simultaneously. It would aggressively unpack massive volumes of junk data directly into the active memory pool without any throttling or safety limits. It was the digital equivalent of trying to inflate a commercial hot air balloon inside a glass telephone booth. The pressure would be catastrophic. To execute a perfect crime, however, you need a perfect patsy. If forensic investigators looked at the server logs after the inevitable failure, they would easily find the exact timestamp when the rogue code was injected. I could not let that digital trail lead back to my terminal. Thankfully, Marcus was as careless as he was incompetent. Earlier that week, he had handed me his incredibly expensive, heavily encrypted company laptop and asked me to fix a minor calendar synchronization error. During the 3 minutes I had his unlocked machine, I quietly installed a lightweight, invisible background network tunnel. Tonight, sitting in the dark office, I did not access the server directly. I routed my connection entirely through his personal machine. Every single keystroke I made, every line of toxic code I injected, was digitally signed by his master administrator credentials. I tied the payload securely to his specific internet protocol address, to the server, to the company firewall, and to any future federal auditor. It was the chief technology officer himself who had logged in at midnight and planted the bomb. I finished compiling the script, watched the progress bar hit 100%, and wiped my local access logs clean. I shut down my computer, grabbed my coat, and walked out into the cool Texas night. The trap was set, the safety was off, and the gun was resting firmly in Marcus's hands. The atmosphere inside the glass-walled auditorium in the heart of Silicon Valley was intoxicating, thick with the scent of expensive cologne and the quiet hum of unimaginable wealth. This was the pinnacle of corporate theater. The venue was a multi-million-dollar architectural marvel, suspended high above the city streets. Waiters in crisp white shirts floated through the crowd, offering crystal flutes of vintage champagne to dozens of ruthless venture capitalists. These were the apex predators of the tech world, men and women sitting in plush, velvet-lined seats, waiting impatiently to see if our company was a unicorn or just another rotting carcass. The stage was bathed in a brilliant, blinding white spotlight. At the exact center stood Julian. He had completely leaned into the tech messiah persona, wearing a tight, black cashmere turtleneck and frameless glasses, a pathetic and obvious imitation of Steve Jobs. He held a sleek wireless microphone, pacing slowly back and forth across the polished floor, commanding the room with his booming theatrical voice. For decades, the physical boundaries of data have held human progress hostage, Julian declared, gesturing broadly toward the massive 60-foot digital screen behind him. We have been told that bandwidth is finite. We have been told that spatial limits are absolute, but I refuse to accept that reality. I asked myself, what if we could rewrite the laws of physics? What if we could fold space and time within our own servers? Tonight, I am thrilled to show you the architectural breakthrough that I have poured my very soul into creating. It was a masterful performance of pure, unadulterated theft. While Julian bathed in the adoration of the elite, I existed in the complete opposite of his world. I was standing in the cramped, heavily air-conditioned control booth located high above the back of the auditorium. The booth was completely shrouded in darkness, illuminated only by the frantic, pulsing green and blue lights of the monitoring dashboards. While the rest of the executive team wore bespoke suits, I was dressed in a simple, faded gray zip-up jacket. I stood silently in the darkest corner of the room, far away from the nervous chatter of the junior technicians. My hands were wrapped tightly around a cheap paper cup of black coffee that had gone ice cold hours ago. My eyes were absolutely locked onto the primary telemetry screen. Down on the stage, the demonstration began. Marcus, standing nervously at a secondary podium, initiated the sequence. The system, my beautiful, stolen creation, purred to life with terrifying efficiency. The massive screen behind Julian exploded with real-time performance graphs. The metrics shot upward in perfectly smooth, flawless arcs. Julian snapped his fingers, and a massive spatial video file, exactly 100 gigabytes of raw, uncompressed topographical data, was transmitted from a remote server located halfway across the globe. The crowd of cynical investors collectively gasped. The auditorium erupted into spontaneous applause. The colossal file transferred with absolute zero latency and rendered onto the gigantic screen in exactly 2 seconds. Not a single frame dropped, not a single pixel blurred. It was a technological miracle unfolding right before their eyes. Julian closed his eyes for a brief moment, soaking in the thunderous applause as if he were a god receiving worship. He was completely drunk on the victory, floating on a high of his own immense ego. That is just the beginning, Julian purred into the microphone, his voice dripping with supreme confidence. He walked to the edge of the stage and looked directly at the front row. He locked eyes with the managing partner of the largest venture capital firm in the room, the man holding the key to a $50 million investment. To truly demonstrate the impenetrable nature of our real-time encryption, I want to do something entirely unscripted, Julian lied, executing the exact routine we had rehearsed. I invite you, sir, to come up to this terminal. I want you to manually input your firm's 10-digit secure identifier directly into our active network bridge. Watch our architecture instantly encrypt and distribute your data packet across 1,000 virtual nodes without a single millisecond of lag. The lead investor chuckled, stood up, and buttoned his suit jacket. He walked up the short staircase onto the stage. Approaching the sleek, glowing terminal pedestal, the entire auditorium fell completely silent. The only sound in the control booth was the heavy, nervous breathing of the technicians around me. Down below, the investor placed his fingers on the pristine mechanical keyboard. I typed the first digit, then the second. In my mind, the gears of the digital guillotine began to turn. The invisible mechanism I had buried deep within the server architecture recognized the incoming alphanumeric string. The conditions were being met perfectly. He typed the final digit and confidently pressed the enter key. The invisible countdown of the execution protocol slammed directly to 0. In the suffocating silence of the dark control booth, I slowly loosened my grip on my cold coffee. I gently placed the paper cup down onto the metal desk. A soft, genuine smile finally spread across my face. For exactly 1 second after the lead investor pressed the final key, the massive display held its breathtaking resolution. The topographical data rotated flawlessly. The elite audience began to lean back in their plush velvet chairs, completely satisfied and ready to open their checkbooks. Then, the illusion violently shattered. The seamless graphics did not just freeze, they convulsed. A violent, jagged horizontal tear ripped across the 60-foot screen, fracturing the beautiful image into 1,000 distorted fragments. Before the crowd could even process the visual corruption, the sound system detonated. A horrifying, high-frequency audio feedback loop shrieked through the auditorium's surround sound speakers. It sounded like screaming metal amplified 1,000 times. Down in the front row, multimillionaire investors violently flinched, dropping their crystal champagne flutes to the polished floor and pressing their hands tightly over their ears. The sound of shattering glass mingled with the piercing digital scream. This was not your standard, pathetic blue screen of death. A simple system crash would have allowed Julian to pivot, to make a charming, self-deprecating joke about beta testing and bandwidth issues. But my algorithm was not crashing. It was executing its new primary directive with terrifying, flawless efficiency. The localized decompression overload had begun. The system was aggressively unpacking hundreds of terabytes of highly compressed, absolute garbage data directly into the active memory pool. It was forcibly vomiting digital waste. On the massive display behind Julian, the fragmented image of the map was violently flushed away. In its place, millions of lines of pure, blood-red hexadecimal code began to cascade down the screen. It looked like a catastrophic digital hemorrhage. The code poured down in a relentless, blinding waterfall, illuminating the panicked faces of the wealthy audience in a sinister, pulsing crimson glow. Then, the ultimate humiliation was rendered in perfect, uncompressed clarity, slicing right through the middle of the chaotic red code. A colossal text box dominated the dead center of the display. The font was aggressive, blocky, and completely inescapable. Every single letter was 10 feet tall. Warning: stolen copyright detected. Unauthorized access denied from the original architecture by Aurora Gray. The message did not just appear once. It pulsed rhythmically, flashing on and off like a neon sign in a nightmare, searing my name into the retinas of every single venture capitalist in the room. The absolute silence of initial shock rippled through the auditorium, quickly replaced by a rising tide of chaotic murmurs, angry shouts, and outright panic. Up in the glass-walled control booth, the digital disaster was manifesting physically. The server racks housing the local node were going into catastrophic thermal throttling. The central processing units were drawing maximum power, desperately trying to process the infinite loop of decompression. The industrial cooling fans screamed like jet engines trying to take off inside a closet. The piercing, rhythmic wail of the hardware temperature alarms began to blare, cutting through the audio feedback from the stage below. The ambient temperature in the room spiked almost instantly. The distinct acrid stench of burning ozone and melting silicon filled the cramped booth. The physical servers were literally cooking themselves to death. The junior technicians around me were running in blind circles, shouting terrified, completely useless commands at each other. Down on the stage, the perfectly curated, arrogant persona of Julian Vance completely evaporated. His confident posture collapsed, his shoulders slumping as if he had been physically struck. The veins in his neck bulged as he turned to look at the massive flashing text behind him. All the color drained from his face, leaving him looking like a corpse under the harsh stage lights. He looked exactly like a man who had just stepped on a landmine and finally heard the mechanical click beneath his boot. "Marcus!" Julian roared into his wireless microphone, his voice cracking and echoing over the chaotic noise of the panicked auditorium. "Shut it down! Pull the primary power right now! Cut the feed!" Marcus was already slamming his trembling hands against the terminal on the secondary podium. I was hyperventilating, his expensive designer shirt now completely soaked in dark patches of sweat. He aggressively typed override commands, desperately trying to initiate an emergency kill sequence. "I cannot do anything," Marcus screamed back, abandoning the microphone entirely and shouting over the deafening noise. "The terminal is completely unresponsive. I am locked out of the root directory. The administrator credentials have been completely overwritten from the inside. We have zero control." I was locked out because the payload had executed using his own master security tokens. The system recognized the chief technology officer as the primary threat and bolted the digital doors accordingly. The machine was eating itself alive, and the supposed architects of the software were completely powerless to stop it. The investors in the audience were no longer sitting. Dozens of them were on their feet, frantically whispering to their aides, pulling out their phones, and moving swiftly toward the rear exit doors. The $50 million they were prepared to offer was evaporating into thin air with every single rhythmic flash of my name on the bleeding screen. In the midst of the absolute chaos, Julian spun around, looking desperately up toward the darkened glass of the control booth high above the crowd. Through the blinding red glare of the failing screen, his panicked eyes met mine. I stood perfectly still in the shadows, holding my ground amidst the screaming technicians. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I simply looked down at the man who had tried to erase my existence and steal my future. I raised my right hand, extended 2 fingers, and lightly tapped my temple twice. A silent, crystal-clear message cutting through the noise. You did not outsmart anyone, without waiting to see the final embers of his crumbling empire burn out. I turned my back to the glass, pushed open the heavy acoustic door of the control booth, and walked out into the quiet, empty hallway. The immediate fallout was catastrophic and complete. The $50 million investment deal evaporated before the physical servers in the control room had even cooled down. The venture capitalists fled the auditorium as if the building were on fire, taking their checkbooks with them. By the time the sun rose the next morning, OmniStream's internal stock valuation had plummeted to zero, rendering the company shares into completely worthless pieces of paper. Less than 24 hours after the disastrous presentation, the cowardly counterattack began. A process server arrived at my apartment, handing me a massive stack of legal documents. Julian and his aggressive legal team had filed an emergency injunction, threatening to throw me in federal prison for corporate sabotage, destruction of private property, and criminal extortion. They were absolutely confident that the 40-page employment contract was an impenetrable shield that would protect them and ruin me. We met a few days later in a sterile, glass-walled mediation room in downtown San Francisco. Julian sat across the large oak table, radiating toxic, desperate arrogance. He was flanked by Marcus and the same sharp-suited corporate lawyer who had threatened me weeks ago. They fully expected me to walk in begging for mercy. Instead, I arrived completely alone. I did not bring a lawyer. I only brought a single, silver USB drive. which I placed gently onto the center of the table. You have destroyed your own life, Aurora. Julian sneered, leaning heavily over the table. We have the server logs. We know you planted the virus. You are going to spend the next 20 years behind bars. I smiled, shaking my head slowly, feeling entirely at peace. I did not plant a virus. Julian, there is absolutely no malicious code anywhere on those servers. The lawyer scoffed loudly, opening his leather binder. We have the digital forensics showing a catastrophic data wipe. The system is completely locked, and your name was plastered on the screen. Do not insult our intelligence. It is not locked by a virus, I corrected him smoothly, my voice cold and precise. It is locked by a completely legal, federally registered digital rights management software. It is a proprietary anti-piracy protocol. Julian frowned, his artificial confidence wavering for the first time. What in the world are you talking about? I designed the core algorithm you call OmniCore, I explained calmly, maintaining absolute, unblinking eye contact. But the security wrapper that protects it, the hidden kill switch you triggered on stage, is a separate piece of software entirely. I patented and copyrighted that specific digital rights management architecture 3 years and 2 months ago. I registered it long before I ever signed your oppressive 40-page employment contract. It is my pre-existing intellectual property, completely exempt from your corporate claims. I pushed the silver USB drive closer to the lawyer. That drive contains the official federal copyright registration documents, filed under an anonymous holding trust that I legally control. The lawyer went incredibly pale. He quickly plugged the drive into his laptop, his eyes darting frantically as he scanned the authenticated federal documents. He swallowed hard, closing the laptop, and looked at Julian with utter dread. Because you and Marcus copied my algorithm, complete with my embedded security software, onto your primary company servers without purchasing a commercial license, you committed severe software piracy, I continued, enjoying every single second of their dawning realization. When your investor entered that financial code, my software simply did exactly what it was legally programmed to do. It detected unauthorized corporate usage and activated an automated security encryption to protect my intellectual property. You encrypted all our company data, Marcus whispered, trembling in his expensive chair. I protected my legal assets, I corrected him. And according to the licensing terms clearly embedded in the source code, which you accepted the exact moment you deployed it onto your servers. The penalty fee to unlock an enterprise-level commercial breach is $10 million per month, payable directly to my trust. Julian slammed his fists onto the table, his face turning a furious shade of purple. This is absolute extortion. We will sue you into the ground. We will prove you hacked Marcus's computer to plant this file. You cannot prove anything, I replied softly. However, I can prove that Marcus manually altered the Internet protocol routing to mask the theft of my source code. A complete, encrypted dossier detailing his exact network manipulations was automatically sent to the OmniStream Board of Directors exactly 1 hour ago. You cannot sue me for sabotage when my software is simply functioning as a legal shield against your blatant theft. It was an absolute, inescapable checkmate. They were trapped in a legal paradox of their own making. If they admitted the code was mine, they owed me millions. If they claimed it was theirs, they were entirely responsible for their own system failure. They had stepped into a snare that tightened the more they struggled. The destruction of OmniStream was swift and brutal. Within a week, the furious board of directors ousted Julian Vance in absolute disgrace. The Securities and Exchange Commission immediately opened a massive federal investigation into his fraudulent investor relations and technical claims. The company officially filed for bankruptcy shortly after, their legacy reduced to a pathetic cautionary tale whispered in Silicon Valley coffee shops. As for me, I finally found my peace. I sat in a quiet, sunlit cafe in the peaceful suburbs of Chicago, far away from the toxic hustle of Texas and California. I took a slow sip of a perfectly brewed espresso. I opened my laptop and read the latest email from my new legal representation. It was the final confirmation of a transfer agreement. I had officially sold the legitimate, licensed rights of the Aegis algorithm to a massive national medical technology corporation for an unimaginable, life-changing sum. They were going to use my creation to compress and transmit high-definition magnetic resonance imaging scans to remote hospitals across the globe, saving countless lives. I smiled, a deep, resonant feeling of absolute victory washing over me. I gently closed the laptop, stood up, and walked out of the cafe, stepping warmly into the fading golden sunlight of an American afternoon. The thieves had been buried alive inside the exact same trap they had so arrogantly dug for me. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. Please let me know where you are listening from in the comments below. If you found today's story satisfying, remember that our channel has been entirely demonetized by YouTube, which means we lack the budget to continue operating here and will absolutely not be uploading new videos in the foreseeable future. We are transitioning our work entirely to Patreon. Please help us out by joining the Boss Revenge Stories Patreon to hear the best, most incredible exclusive true stories that we simply cannot make public on YouTube. You can easily scan the Patreon QR code on your screen right now, or use the link provided in the description or the pinned comment.